Last time I did a BBC, I was talking about how perfect Buddhas are born from the thought to help others, and I keep that in mind on probably an hourly basis at this point. But then that, of course, then leads you to how to become a Buddha, and that leads you to bodhicitta, and that leads me to how can I not let this aspiration degenerate? And we have these aspiring bodhicitta precepts. And the very first one for how not to let it degenerate in this life is to remember the advantages of bodhicitta repeatedly. Of course, that sends you to Shantideva, chapter 1. So I only really got into the first advantage, and I just stayed with that for the last weeks because there was a lot there to think about. So I'll read these two verses that bring us to the first advantage that Shantideva speaks about, where he says, just as lightning illuminates the darkness on a cloudy night for an instant, in the same way, by the power of the Buddha, occasionally people's minds are turned momentarily inclined towards merit. Thus, virtue is perpetually ever so feeble, or as one translator says, thus behold the utter fragility of goodness. While the power of vice is great and extremely dreadful. If there were no spirit of perfect awakening, what other virtue would overcome it? Or, as I looked at all these various translations of that last line, what other good can overcome it if there were not the spirit of complete awakening? Or what other virtue can lay it low? Or Alex Berzin has, except for full bodhicitta, can anything else constructive outshine it? So when I read that verse, the first thought I had for some reason was of how much to overcome great vice would contribute to world peace. And then well-being and just harmony in society and just, it's just like this very strong thought. And I just dwelled on that for days, like making examples of like news stories. Like think about all of the qualities that you have to develop to develop bodhicitta, starting with equanimity. So there, we're actually making room for people. We're not categorizing them and throwing them out as enemies or being indifferent towards them or whatever. We're actually making room for people in our heart. They're worthy of our concern. Amazing. And then to think about like, the love that wishes for their happiness, or the compassion that doesn't want others to suffer, and then seeing the damage that our self-centeredness does. It's just so, it's just ruining things for ourselves and others. So, along these kind of practices that we work our minds along, we get to great compassion, which really cares about everyone and has like everyone in mind. And then the great resolve that you want to do something. You're going to endeavor. You're going to be an active participant. And as the 108 verses of praise and great compassion say, the activity of the conqueror's children, the bodhisattvas, the pure thought of compassion that takes up the burden of others' welfare is difficult for the minds of ordinary beings to fathom, which I think is very true. And even if you didn't have that, even if you just came to the thought like Albert Schweitzer did of reverence for life, which was for all life, that would be a great and tremendous thing. It would really impact our world. Even without full bodhicitta, or even without all the practices, we would have, as I thought about this, I thought about anything I read in the news or different stories, and like, this would be very different. Life would be very different if people were carrying themselves in this way. And two specific examples that came to mind, I don't know why, but I guess they just stuck with me. One was these earthquakes in Turkey that happened in 2023, where the little I read about it, they actually had ordinances and city government officials and builders who were all supposed to be making these buildings stronger to certain earthquake codes. That didn't happen. So many people were died or were injured or their homes were lost because actually there wasn't this, there was kind of, I would say maybe an indifference because of the wish for profit. That wouldn't have happened. You know, if you had any of these teachings on board, this would not have happened. And the other thing that has always stuck with me, I find a little, I don't want to say unforgivable. I'm not supposed to say that as a Buddhist, or a Buddha, or as a Buddhist, but I would say not acceptable in a great way. Was in 2018 this immigration policy where they separated families. There were 5,000 families separated, and even as of February 2024, only 2,000 still haven't been reunited. This is of great harm to many, many people. And think about if the decision makers that brought about this policy had some of these characteristics or some of these trainings and some of this cultivation where they actually considered the harm to these individuals and these children and, you know, all of that. This never would have happened. This would not have happened. Things would have been different. Our world would be different. So, and then of course, wars and conflicts. It's just really clear. So my conclusion from this was, yes, Alex Berzin is right. Really nothing can outshine bodhicitta. This is really the pinnacle. I couldn't think of anything better. It was so all-encompassing. And also that the practices that lead to it have tremendous impact. And then after all of this, I just thought, well, maybe I should read what the commentators say about this verse, because this is just my thoughts, right? And so I read a couple, and the one that I wanted to share was one that included the outline. So the outline for this verse 6 in particular, which is the one I read 5 and 6, the second verse, is actually about the conquest of great evil. I don't really use that word. So I say great negativities or vices or negative karma. This is one of the advantages of bodhicitta, is you are going to conquer great negativities. And I had only actually been thinking about external situations, but Geshe Yeshe Topten actually brings it to our own situation, our own, this person here, maybe everyone in this room, maybe all sentient beings who are not realized. So this, actually, when he first talks about that, he first brings it, so he brings it to the personal situation. And at first, in the whole context of this section is actually about to make our precious human life meaningful. And so he first addresses that, and he explains that our lives are as rare and fleeting as sudden lightning on a dark night. So that's how he takes that verse. It's an indication of how precious our situation is. And then when he addresses the benefits of bodhicitta, which is the next part of the outline, the greater one, that now they're going to list a whole bunch. We're just at the first one, this conquest of great negativities. He explains that actually negative karma is prevalent and intense, and virtuous karma is weak and incidental. And I'm like, what does incidental really mean here? So there's two definitions of it. And I think it might be the second, but it could be either. Incidental means accompanying, but not a major part of something, or occurring by chance in connection with something else. So he's somewhat saying that our virtuous karma is not only weak, but it's like we might not have even been fully motivated to do it. It might have been incidental in the effect of, we might have had somewhat of a motivation, but maybe it wasn't all there. I don't know. Anyway, that was what he said. And then he goes on to explain that actually our negative karma, thus, because of this, is consequently, it's much more common than our virtuous karma. And it's strong, and it's been something we've been accumulating since beginning of time. And so as a result of that, What ordinary virtue could overcome that? Actually, I don't think an ordinary virtue could overcome that. I do think his logic falls on me to be true, that only the strength of bodhicitta, that virtue, would be the only thing that would be strong enough to overcome negative karma since beginningless time. Because even logically, if I think about it, with bodhicitta, you don't leave out any single being. So it'd be easy to leave one person out and create great negative karma. So if you have to really take into account everyone, that's a huge task and a beautiful task. So his conclusion, and mine as well, is that bodhicitta can help us solve these problems. They can help us solve all kinds of great negativity, and even things that lead up to it. Any effort that we make, it kind of reminds me of when I used to do yoga, and I had to explain this to people once. To me, my experience in doing yoga was every moment was unwasted. I never felt like any moment, it wasn't like I had to do it 3 days in a row or 4 days in a row or 5 days in a row. Of course, these things accumulate, but every moment that I did yoga, actually I found to be beneficial, and even science accords with some of these things. Short duration exercise has immediate benefits. And so, every effort we make to develop our mind in this way, and all these practices that lead to this, are going to be beneficial for us. They might help our day. They might help us with the next problem that comes up. And then they'll all add up eventually and become something that is amazingly strong and beneficial